All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to May. And you may not know this, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which right now is a really, really big deal. I think more than most. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm here with Tran, who is one of my favorite mental health professionals and whom I really respect tremendously. And I thought it'd be really helpful to get his perspective on a few things related to mental health. And just to kind of establish who you are a little bit, other than somebody I appreciate a lot personally, Lee is the owner of some counseling practices, lifeology counseling practices in the Dallas area. I think you have plans to expand beyond that too.
Yeah.
And as well as the founder of Watershed. Tell us a little bit about what Watershed is.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. And I love being here. And you're one of my favorite pastors as well, Jeff. Just to let you know that. So
good taste.
Lifeology, you can think of it like it's a practice that, like most practices, we do therapy, offer counseling, wide range of services. Watershed is more of kind of like my nonprofit side, where we like to do a lot of community support, where we do a lot of education, preventative tools, things like that. So it allows us to support local organizations, nonprofits, churches like Chase Oaks. So that's kind of the idea behind Watershed.
Okay. And we'll come back at the end for those who want to know, hey, how would I engage Watershed or Lifeology, either one? So let's make sure we do that so that people know how to maybe take a next step that way, if that would be helpful for them. So, it's interesting days right now in thinking of mental health because I think the challenges in our culture are maybe bigger than ever. I know as a pastor, I'm certainly feeling that the number of people who are struggling right now, emotionally, mentally struggling in their relationships is way higher than normal coming out of a pandemic. And I guess that's predictable in a pandemic year. And I don't know if it's that those issues were already there and the pandemic just magnified those issues, or if the pandemic and the circumstances around it sort of produced those issues in people's lives. I don't know that. I just know a lot of people seem to be struggling more than typical. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that across the board, not just in my own practice, but I would say a number of other practices, our call volumes are increasing. We're getting a lot more requests. A lot of people asking for help with their relationships, their marriages, just their parenting relationships with their kids. A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. There's a lot more uptick when it comes to those kinds of cases. And so for sure, we're seeing a rise. And, that's not abnormal. I think we tend to see more and more people reaching out just because mental health is becoming more of an option. I mean, Mental Health Awareness Month kind of dictates that and kind of shows that people are more willing to take a look at their mental health. But I think for sure the pandemic has really put people in a place where they're needing to really look more at how they're doing personally and in their relationships. And so just the pandemic's kind of really pushed the envelope even more in that way.
Let's go a little deeper in that. So you talked about the pandemic, how it's impacting people. What do you think has been the most challenging aspects of the pandemic?
Gosh, yeah, that's a great question. I like the way you put it before. There may have been a lot of things that were going on before that were really just maybe patterns of how people were living prior to the pandemic. Right. I guess the best way I can describe it is that we all have a certain kind of limit. We have a kind of a point at which we can manage things, right? And so you could say before the pandemic, everyone's managing, say, maybe fairly well. Some people more or less, but they're kind of right here. But then, a lot of things that may have been working for us before, things like diet, nutrition, exercise, getting outside, being socially engaged, having friends and community. These are all things that maybe people had already going for them, that they could kind of manage their mental health and their emotional health well. But after the pandemic, a lot of those things were no longer available to a lot of people. And so if you kind of think about it this way, a lot of people are running low on fuel. They're not able to really go as far. They're not really able to manage as much strain in their relationships, as much strain in their marriages or with their kids. And depression, anxiety are all parts of that as well. And so the best way I would describe it, if we want to dig deep into what the pandemic can do, is that it can take away a lot of fuel that people typically will have access to. And it will make a lot of people just kind of run empty, but also they're bumping against a lot of other people in community and relationships that are running empty as well. And so when you have that kind of mixed together, when you got people that are just really trying to make it through the pandemic, you've got a lot of those kinds of things. Like I said before, strain on relationships, depression, anxiety, those kinds of things become a lot more apparent, a lot more frequent.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think, I'm sure before the pandemic, there were a number of people who were pretty self-aware about some of the struggles they had. I mean, they had some struggles going into the pandemic, and it accelerated those struggles. As you said, the things that help keep us balanced, were removed. And yet I think also for a lot of people, they're kind of new to feeling some of these things, new to anxiety, depression, or feeling really, really disconnected from people. And I remember, there was a time in my life, it was a long time ago now, after I graduated from grad school, and a number of stress factors and disappointments kind of converged in a way that I entered into a time, the only thing I can call it is clinical depression, for a number of months. And I was new to that kind of struggle. I didn't do that. I'm a pastor, I help other people, but that doesn't happen to me. Like, I don't struggle like that way.
Sure, yeah.
Well, the wheels were off. Like it was deep enough and long enough that I realized that this is something I need help with, but that can be really hard to know, just that self-assessment, especially if it's kind of a new phenomenon. And it's hard to make an accurate self-assessment of how am I really doing? And is this really that big of a deal? And what do I do with these feelings? Because, we might know that we're not quite right. Maybe we're a little bit more anxious than normal. Stomach is a little messed up in some weird ways, or, we're having trouble sleeping. We are more angry than normal, more irritable, feeling sad in ways that we didn't normally do that. So we're feeling these things we're not used to feeling, but don't really know how big of a deal, don't know what to do with them, don't know how to make them go away. And if there's anybody watching that was like I was in the first part of that, and that I occasionally still am, what would you suggest would be kind of that next step? Okay, I know something's not right. I don't know how big a deal this is. I don't like the way I'm feeling. I don't know how to make it go away. What would you say to them? Hey, what are some healthy steps you could take if that's where you're at toward mental health?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story first, by the way. I know you've shared that before, and I think it's an important one to share, just to normalize it for a lot of people. I mean, everyone deals with it in some way at some point in time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think even the way you described that, even as a pastor, I would even say as a therapist, it's important for everyone, including people who are in helping professions, pastors, therapists alike, to be able to reach out to other people to get a kind of an objective perspective, if you will, because it's really easy to what I call go nose deaf. Like, you know how like in nose deaf, you kind of like, you just get used to a smell after a while. It just becomes part of like life, and you kind of don't even notice it because it's your life, right? You just kind of get used to it, right? And I think that's how it works for mental health. I think that we just get used to the way things work. We get used to the way work goes, the way that our relationships are, the way life is. And it can gradually turn into something very, very different than what we originally had hoped for. And so it helps to have someone come in and just say, hey, let's take a look and see what's going on, and give a fresh perspective, if you will. So I think that's really important for us to be able to know it's normal for people to have a hard time seeing that for themselves and to self-assess. And it's always helpful to just get someone else to kind of come in and take a look and say, hey, what's going on? Like, what do you see? Right. So I would say it's a really important first step. Just be willing to include someone else into that just to get a better perspective. And, it doesn't matter if you're a professional or a pastor or whatever, everyone's going to need that at some point in time. So that's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing I would say would be a good first step, or maybe a way to really maintain good mental health, is look for what I would call the check engine lights. You mentioned a couple things in that, like anger, sadness, depression, anxiety. These are what I call, they're what in clinical world we call primary emotions. Think of them like primary colors. They're the first and most intensive emotions that people typically feel: anger, fear, and sadness. And if you think of those as check engine lights, think about it for a car. Like, those things are your check engine lights. So if you're looking at your dashboard and those things come up a little bit more frequently, or maybe a little bit more disproportionate, like I'm feeling a little bit more irritable, a little bit more angry, or a little bit more down than normal, or I'm really anxious about different things, I'm not sure why. Yeah. That would be a good indicator that the check engine light has gone off. And so that's a good first step, just to get used to your dashboard, just to be able to know, not necessarily do anything about it, but to be able to spot it. That's the first thing, because you can't spot it and you can't do anything about it, right? And then I would say the second thing would be to know how to just begin to start diagnosing and processing some of those things, moving from primary emotions to what are called, I would say, secondary emotions, where you're thinking, okay, it has more to do with loss of some sort, or maybe rejection, or feelings of inadequacy. There are much more nuanced ways to define what's going on, but it takes time. Like, as if you were to say, okay, check engine light's gone off, let's pull over for a second. Let's pop the hood and let's see what's going on, right? And that would be another good step. And if that doesn't work, if you don't have those kind of tools, then definitely talking with a professional can help equip you with some of those things to figure out, how do I process some of those things? How do I self-diagnose and work through some of those things as I pop the hood? But yeah, that would be probably the third step, I would say, is talk with a professional. It doesn't have to be that there's anything really big going on. It could be just, like, to use a car analogy, just going for a tune-up. Just go and talk to a mechanic and say, hey, what's going on? It may be nothing. It may be something. But it'll be worth talking to someone to be able to figure out, hey, is there more to this than meets the eye?
And probably, like car problems, sooner is better than later. It's generally not going to get better on its own. At least that's been my experience. And I know in that more dramatic time in my life, I projected, I was dealing with depression. I projected publicly almost an overcompensating. And then it was exhausting to do that, right? Because there's this disparity. And so when I was home, I was just, all I could do was sleep. I didn't want to get out of bed and all this. And then eventually that just sort of took over and I lost the ability, so I wished I wished I'd done that sooner than later to get perspective and some of the help that I got that I needed. But I do want to talk a little bit about that, because certainly a number of things have helped me, life-giving friendships and other things to pursue when feeling some of those. But you talked about counseling and, when to go there. Is that a good thing or not? I know for me, over the years, not only that time, but over the years, just been moments in my life where I benefited from counseling, benefited from therapy, and in a way that even really good friends couldn't do, because I think what they provided for me was objectivity and a framework, so they were objective, but they also had a framework. They knew what to look for. They had a framework to help me understand what was happening and to help me kind of process, not just know what I'm feeling, but to sort of, what are some steps, like what are some process steps? What are some steps to sort of move through this? And to me, that's a big difference, right? Between just talking to a friend and saying, hey, I'm really struggling. And sometimes that's really helpful. Often that's helpful, but my experience has been, at least most people don't have that training and have that framework to help. And so, and yet I know there's hesitancy about pursuing counseling. I think that's gotten a lot better. But still, there's sort of this idea that, boy, something must be really wrong with you if you're going to therapy, or something must be really wrong if you're going to go see a counselor. And I know there's still a lot of misconceptions out there. So what would you say to someone who's feeling some of these things, but still has some pretty big reservations about reaching out to a counselor?
Yeah. First, I want to go back and tag kind of what you said before, what your experience is, and maybe what the distinction is between counseling and just talking to someone.
Yeah,
Because you're right. I think a lot of people have the mindset that if I can just talk to a friend or a family member, then that's good. That's good enough. And let me be clear. I think that's necessary. I think having people in your life that can do that are essential and important.
Yeah.
But to your point, what therapy will do is it will operate much much more precision, if you will. Like, yeah. And whenever I talk with a client, I am thinking through the experience of all the other clients that I've seen before, and being able to put that through a framework, an analytical framework of, okay, this is what's going on. This is why it's happening. This is what you can do. Probably the best way I would put it is that talking with a therapist, a really good therapist will expedite, will allow you to be able to move much faster and being able to know really what's going on, so that you're not in pain and suffering nearly for as long as you would otherwise. And so, yeah, I like the fact that you said that. So I just wanted to tag that real quick, because that is something that I think needs to be more clarified and distinguished for most people that don't really have any experience with therapy. But to your other question, which is what would I say to someone who has those reservations? What I found is that people typically have hesitation and resistance and just a lot of fear about going in for therapy. Kind of like how it would be like if you're going to go in to see a doctor or a dentist. Like, some of it is like you'd rather not know that there's something wrong, right?
Yeah,
like,
if they look under the hood, they may find something.
Yeah, right. Like, it's totally like, I think I'm cool. It's not that bad. I don't think I really want to go there because they might tell me something that I didn't want to know, or that they're going to tell me something that really isn't an issue, but they're making it an issue, kind of thing. And so I find that usually one of the hesitations for it. I think another thing is that they may know that there's something going on, but it's too painful to actually dig into, right? And so if you know that there's a history that is causing issue, or something in your present life that's causing issue, and it could be painful if it gets brought up or touched upon. And so that's another reason why a lot of people don't go in. Another one is cost. Another one is just, it might cost a lot of money. And I'm going to go back to what you said earlier, which is that, if a lot more people just paid attention to their check engine lights, went in for tune-ups and did some maintenance work, we're talking a difference of, like, it's one thing to change your oil, but it's another thing to buy a new engine block, right? That there is a cost factor. And a lot of reasons why there's such cost factor behind it is because, but a lot of times when I see people coming into my office, it's like they're already well down the road of a lot of damage. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I really love seeing the clients where they're like, hey, we're seeing something, and I just want to look at it before it could get worse. Those are my, so to speak, my favorite clients, because we can get a lot of good work done and save a lot of pain and time and money in the long run, right? And so that's what I would say to people who are kind of on the fence. Like, it's what's the saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, kind of thing, right? So
Franklin, right? I think.
Yeah. So that's the way I would put it, for sure.
So we talked about the difference between friends and counselors, and why you really need, both. And I know, going back to that experience in my life, there was a couple, we had done youth ministry together here at Chase Oaks Church, where I still serve. Their name's Doug and Sandy Bainbridge. And I was living in Alabama at the time, and would come back here to just stay. We would just stay with them and hang out with them with no expectation of anything. I just needed to be around people who were safe, people who I knew were for me, whether I could perform for them or not, whether I could be helpful or not, whether I could, it's just, so I think friends can do what counselors can't do, and counselors can do what friends can't do as well, right? As we were talking about, and both were certainly important in my journey, as you said. One without the other, I don't think I would have made it, but both of those together. And there were other friends too. Jack Warren on our staff, still to this day, was one of those people as well in my life. But But when you're, trying to figure out, I mean, I think you hinted at this to kind of say, hey, it's, tune-ups are better than waiting for your, getting the oil change is better than waiting for your car block to crack. But when do you think it's time for somebody to go in? Like, how would they know, or what would you say to somebody who's like, well, I don't know, I'm on the fence. How do you know when to go talk to somebody?
Well, I would love it if, in the spirit of Mental Health Awareness Month, if people took the same type of approach to mental health as they do their physical health, like going in for an annual checkup. Like if you just went in to talk with a therapist just to see, hey, what's going on? And there may be nothing, there may be something, but just getting in the normal routine of just going in for a checkup. I think that would be when to, if you're asking when's a good time to go see a counselor, if it's been more than a year, if it's been more than a year since you've seen it, particularly in this year in pandemic, then if it's been over a year, go and talk with someone just to see. But if you're noticing those check engine lights, if you're also noticing, hey, like I'm just really irritable and my responses feel disproportionate and I don't know where that's coming from, and I don't know why I'm feeling sad the way I am, and I'm a lot more hyper vigilant about my feelings of anxiousness around whatever, it could be anything. Then it's worth talking with someone to find out, well, why is that there? Like it's there for a reason. If you're in tune with what's going on your dashboard and what's going on with those top level emotions, those are the things that will tell you. And so don't ignore them is the first thing. And being able to just know how to be in tune with them. And then at that point, talking with someone to figure out what's going on before it becomes an issue. I would say those two things would be my answer to when is a good time to see a counselor.
And this may be a difficult one for you to answer because you run a couple of, counseling practices and so on. But I think one of the hindrances too is just for people to know, we're going to get to where to start, but even like how to find a good one, because, we've been using the car repair analogy, right? And, we probably all had the experience where you go in for the oil change and then they tell you, well, you need new brakes and you need new this,
right.
and you need to flush this thing out. And, for $700, we could totally fix you up and, your car, and you're like, I don't trust you. Like, I don't, and then you go to somebody else, right? And they're like, oh no, you don't need any of that. Your car is fine. And I'm sure people have had those kind of experiences too, or at least fears when you think of counselors. So how can you find a trusted counselor, like one that how does that, what would you say to somebody?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I love the analogy too, because that's usually everyone's fear about going to see a mechanic is that I don't want to get ripped off. I don't want to go into someplace where they're going to tell me I need a whole lot more than I really need. And we get to waste thousands and thousands of dollars, right? I think, well, first, just speaking generally, it's important to be able to find a therapist, like I think, as you mentioned before, that has a framework, that has a training to be able to understand and really diagnose and assess what's going on as fast as possible. Typically, people think of therapy as you go in, you talk about your feelings, and it goes on and on and on. Like you could be in therapy for the rest of your life, just talking about what's going on and what you're feeling. That is not what I would say ethically responsible mental health care. There are therapists that will definitely do that. And that's actually probably one of the challenges that I face on my end, is that we're trying to, in a sense, rebrand what therapy is, because that can be the experience. And so that's unfortunate. But I would say that it would start with finding trusted sources, like whether it's at Chase Oaks, talking with pastors who have connections with people and therapists, say, hey, these are people that you can trust, or these are therapists that I know personally that have that's a fairly good success rate, that they do good work. So always a referral is best. But if not, you can go online, you can do some research. You're really looking for therapists that have maybe an understanding, can demonstrate an understanding of what it is you're going through, and be able to define, for example, what is depression? Why is depression happening? And what may be going on? And being able to offer maybe some examples of some solutions that they've put behind that too. So that would be a general answer. So.
Yeah, that's helpful. And certainly as a church, we're happy to do that. And I don't do long-term counseling because I'm not good at it. It's not my gifting, and I actually really stink.
Yeah, and there's a reason why they don't put me on the stage, Jeff.
I always, hear people, I'm like, oh no, that's terrible, but that's not really that helpful. So, but I have over the years, you find people like yourself that we feel really great about referring to, and we're certainly happy to do that, because I would certainly say, man, it'd be better to go in sooner than later, and to risk of maybe not getting the right connection. You can always find another connection, but the risk of waiting too long, I think, is greater. At least that's been my experience. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And just to kind of tag it at the end, just because we are very much interested in trying to get people the right help that they need. And Chase Oaks has always been an advocate for that. And even before Mental Health Awareness Month, we still have a kind of a program to really be there for the community to offer those mental health services.
Yeah.
But because this is Mental Health Awareness Month, I wanted to be able to at least offer a little bit of incentive right now. So it's cool. For my practice, I've got a number of therapists throughout the Collin County area, and we're offering 30-minute assessments, free assessments. That's just to be able to talk with someone to find out, hey, let's take a look and see what's going on. And if nothing's going on, then that's great. If it's just, hey, you need a few tools, or maybe it's 1 or 2 sessions, then we can work with that. But we're offering that right now. So if you're listening to this and you want to take advantage of that, go to chaseoaks.org /care, and there will be a form you can fill out and say, hey, I'd like to be able to sign up for that free 30-minute assessment, and we can definitely dive in and help out and see if there's anything that we can do to help.
Well, thanks for how you partner with us. That's amazing. And how you partner with us as a church. And it gives us so much confidence to be able to offer this next step, you know, for people that, so I'll give you a final word here. Is there sort of one more thing you would say to somebody who is really struggling right now, coming out of this pandemic and trying to emerge out of it? And what would be, is there one more thing that you might say to somebody who is feeling, who is there right now, mentally, emotionally, relationally?
Yeah, I think you would resonate with this too, because, just with your history of depression and having gone through seasons like this in my life as well. When you're in a low place or a dark place, it can just feel like a lot of pain. And it's easy, I think, to shell up and to kind of recoil. And that's the reason why this is a problem. That's our human tendency. Our human tendency is to withdraw and to cut off from connection with other people. And like the way you said it, we need both friendships and community, but we also need professional help at times. And that dynamic, that mind frame is going to cut us off from both of those avenues. And so my encouragement, talking to someone who may be in that spot right now, and I know a number of people, both personally and professionally, that are in exactly that position where they're just, I don't want to get out. I don't want to connect. I'm just in this place, and it's easier for me to stay here. Don't stay there for too long, because it will get out of hand if you let it. And so, take advantage of those connections. Get out, connect in community, in church, in a group. But definitely take advantage of whatever mental health resources that are available. And we're trying to offer whatever we can just to make sure that happens. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Lee. And, to everybody, whether you're in our church or not in our church, let's just be there for each other in a difficult season, and pay attention to each other. And if we see something that's just not quite right in each other, let's love each other enough to say, hey, I just want to make sure that you're really okay, because, something just doesn't feel quite the same, or doesn't feel quite right. And to kind of help all of us grow in awareness, we need to be there for each other, especially this year. And this is a great month to have those conversations with each other too, if you're wondering. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of the month, and thanks for tuning in with us.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.